Lieutenant Samantha Hayes stood on the deck of the massive aircraft carrier USS Roosevelt, her helmet tucked under her arm as the salty wind whipped through her hair. The ocean stretched endlessly around her, but her mind was focused on one thing: proving she deserved to be here. She was the youngest pilot in the fleet, and the only woman in her squadron. Every step she took felt like walking through invisible judgment. Her call sign was Viper. It sounded fierce, dangerous, and cool, at least to anyone who didn't know the story behind it. Samantha didn't get that name because she was fast or ruthless in the air. She got it because of how she flew. Quietly, patiently, waiting for the right moment to strike. During her training, her instructor once said, "You're like a viper, Hayes. You don't waste energy. You just watch, and then you hit once, and it's over." The name stuck, but on her first day aboard the carrier, the senior officers didn't take it seriously. When the Admiral read her name during introductions, he chuckled. "Viper? Huh," he said, raising an eyebrow. "What's next? Rattlesnake?" The pilots around her laughed. Someone in the back muttered, "More like kitten, sir." The laughter got louder. Samantha smiled politely, but her face burned. She knew how this worked. New pilots always had to earn their place, especially when they stood out. And she definitely stood out. Unlike most of the others, she didn't brag about flight hours or simulator scores. She listened. She watched. She analyzed every little thing: the weather, the radar flickers, even how other pilots talked about their missions. She wasn't there to impress anyone. She was there to learn and be ready when it really mattered. That first week was rough. Every time she walked into the hangar, someone had a joke waiting for her. "Careful, boys, the Viper might be watching," they'd tease. "Hey, Hayes, when do you strike?" During lunch break, she'd just nod and keep walking, pretending it didn't bother her. But inside, she made herself a promise. "One day, they'll understand why I'm here." Her bunk was small, the walls thin, and the nights long. She often stayed awake after lights out, looking at flight maps on her tablet. She studied every movement of enemy fleets, every radar signal she could access, and old mission reports. She had a strange talent for noticing patterns, details that others brushed off as coincidence. She didn't know why, but her brain worked like that. Maybe it came from her father, who had been a math teacher before joining the Navy himself. He once told her, "Numbers never lie, Sam. Even chaos follows rules if you look closely enough." Those words stuck with her. During training flights, while other pilots focused on flashy maneuvers and speed, Samantha paid attention to what the instruments told her. The tiny shifts in wind, the drop in pressure, the faint movement on radar that others ignored. Her instructors at Top Gun had noticed. "Hayes," one of them had said, "you're not just flying, you're solving a puzzle in the air." Still, none of that mattered on the Roosevelt. Here, respect wasn't given for being clever. It was earned through guts, loud confidence, and results. The squadron leader, Commander Brigg, treated her politely but distantly. He had flown for 20 years and trusted instinct over data. To him, war wasn't a chess match. It was about who struck first and hardest. Samantha respected him, but she didn't share his philosophy. She believed war wasn't just about strength. It was about prediction, knowing the enemy's move before it happened. She didn't have the chance to prove that yet, though. One afternoon, she stood on the deck, watching fighter jets roar off the runway one after another, disappearing into the horizon. Her own turn was coming. It was her first solo recon flight under the carrier's command. As she climbed into the cockpit, she could hear a few of the mechanics whispering behind her. "Think she can handle it?" one said. "Hope the Viper doesn't bite her own tail," another joked. She ignored them, pulled down her visor, and said softly to herself, "Let's see who's laughing when I get back." The takeoff was smooth. The sky was a brilliant blue, and the sea below shimmered like glass. Up here, she was free, no laughter, no doubt, no one questioning her. Just her and the machine. She checked her radar, ran her usual diagnostics, and scanned for any unusual signals. Everything seemed normal, but she noticed a faint blip, barely visible, flickering on her screen. It was small, Easy to miss. But something about it caught her attention. It didn't match the flight patterns she had studied. She noted the coordinates and returned to base, her mind racing. It was probably nothing, but what if it wasn't? When she landed, she reported the signal to the control room. The Admiral gave her a puzzled look. Hayes, that's probably just interference. The sea plays tricks on radar sometimes. His tone wasn't harsh, just dismissive. Relax. Save your instincts for when you're under fire. Everyone laughed again, and Samantha forced a small smile, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she had seen something important. As she walked out, she glanced once more at the ocean through the window. The faint blip on her radar wasn't a trick. She knew it. She just didn't know yet that it was the beginning of something that would change how everyone saw her, and the name Viper. Forever. Days turned into weeks aboard the USS Roosevelt, and Samantha Hayes, known by her call sign Viper, was slowly realizing how hard it was to fit in. The other pilots were loud, confident, and loved to show off. They swapped stories about dangerous missions, risky dives, and close calls. Samantha, on the other hand, stayed quiet. She listened carefully, studying their words the same way she studied radar screens. She didn't speak much unless it mattered. Some people mistook that for fear. In truth, she was just focused. Every morning started the same way. The loudspeaker blared the wake-up call. The smell of coffee filled the air, and the sound of jet engines echoed across the deck. The carrier never slept, and neither did Samantha's mind. She was always thinking about patterns, about strategy, about what others might overlook. She noticed small things like how one of the technicians adjusted radar frequencies slightly every few hours, or how the weather reports didn't always match what she saw in the sky. To her squadron, these details were meaningless, but to her they were clues. She believed that every small thing connected to a bigger picture. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling of being an outsider. When the team gathered for briefings, she always sat near the back. The Admiral and senior pilots discussed tactics with authority, using words that sounded like commands more than discussions. When Samantha offered an observation, it often went ignored. Once, she suggested that the enemy might be using decoy signals to confuse their radar. One of the senior pilots laughed. "You've been watching too many spy movies, Viper," he said, grinning. The room chuckled. Samantha smiled politely, but inside, she felt a mix of frustration and determination. She didn't want to prove them wrong just for pride. She wanted to prove that her way of thinking, patient, observant, and analytical, was just as valuable as courage and speed. At night, when others relaxed or played cards, Samantha stayed in the operations room. She liked the quiet hum of machines and the soft glow of radar screens. She'd stare at data logs, replaying flight paths and scanning for inconsistencies. She found comfort in numbers. They didn't lie, they didn't judge, and they always revealed something to those who paid attention long enough. One evening, Commander Brigg, her squadron leader, walked in and found her there. "Hayes, it's almost midnight," he said. "You planning to sleep or marry that radar screen?" Samantha smiled shyly. "Just trying to understand how the patterns shift before a storm, sir." He raised an eyebrow. "You're wasting your time with that stuff. In the air, instincts matter more than patterns. You can't predict the enemy with math." "Maybe not," she replied softly. "But you can predict behavior. Even chaos has a rhythm, sir." He chuckled, shaking his head as he walked out. "You've got brains, Viper. But brains don't win dogfights. Guts do." When he left, Samantha looked back at the radar screen and whispered, "We'll see about that." The next morning, during a group flight exercise, Samantha was assigned to fly wing position behind two senior pilots. The goal was to simulate a surprise interception. Her job was simple: follow, observe, and engage when ordered. But halfway through the exercise, she noticed something odd. The mock enemy jets weren't following their usual maneuver pattern. She calculated the angles in her head and realized they were trying to trap her team from below the radar line. She warned them over the radio. "Falcon, Ghost, check your 6. They're shifting low to the east." Her team leader's voice came back, annoyed. "Relax, Viper. It's just training. Follow your orders." Seconds later, two enemy jets came up exactly where she predicted, locking simulated missiles on her teammates. The alarm sounded, direct hits. The exercise ended and the room fell silent. Back on deck, the squadron leader gave her a look that mixed surprise and irritation. "You were lucky, Hayes. Don't get cocky." But it wasn't luck, and she knew it. She had read their pattern before anyone else did. Word started to spread quietly among a few pilots that Viper had good instincts, even if they didn't admit it publicly. Some started asking her small questions during prep. "Hey Viper, what do you think the enemy would do if?" Or, "How'd you spot that trick yesterday?" She didn't brag. She just explained things simply, showing them how she thought through data. Bit by bit, her quiet presence started earning small respect, though the teasing never completely stopped. The Admiral, however, still didn't take her seriously. To him, she was just a clever rookie with a fancy nickname. "Being smart's nice," he once said during a debriefing. "But out there, missiles don't care about IQ." Everyone laughed again. Samantha didn't. She began to notice something else. Enemy signals showing up on long-range scans at unusual times. They were faint and irregular, like whispers in static. When she tried to bring it up, her report was pushed aside. "We've got real threats to deal with, Lieutenant," one officer said dismissively. "Not your ghost dots." But she couldn't ignore it. The pattern was too familiar. She'd seen similar signals during her training, right before an unexpected drone incursion. Something about it bothered her deeply. Late one night, she sat in her small bunk, staring at her notepad filled with scribbles. Numbers, coordinates, times. She traced the dots and saw a repeating cycle forming. Her heartbeat quickened. It wasn't random interference. It was movement. Real movement. She whispered to herself, "They're testing our radar," getting closer each time. The next morning, she tried again to bring it up during the operations briefing. The Admiral gave her a small smile, the same patronizing one he always had. "Viper, are you saying you can predict when our enemies will show up now?" The room laughed again. She said nothing, but inside, a spark lit in her chest. She wasn't just guessing, she knew. Something was coming, and soon everyone would see it for themselves. That night, as she looked out over the dark sea, she made herself another promise. Next time the Admiral laughed, she would make sure it was the last time he ever did. The night was quiet on the USS Roosevelt. The waves hit the sides of the carrier with a soft rhythm, and the sky was a dark blanket scattered with stars. Most of the crew had gone to rest after a long day of drills, but Lieutenant Samantha Viper Hayes was still in the operations room, her eyes glued to the glowing radar screens. The green dots flickered softly across the display, each one marking a friendly aircraft or ship. Everything looked calm, but something in her gut told her it wasn't. For weeks, Samantha had been tracking strange, flickering signals that appeared and disappeared at random times. They were faint, so faint that most of the crew thought they were just radar errors or atmospheric reflections. But Samantha knew better. She had seen enough radar data to know what was normal and what wasn't. These signals had a rhythm, a pattern, a heartbeat. She leaned closer to the screen and zoomed in on one area, near Grid Echo 7, a stretch of open sea where they had recently run training exercises. There it was again, a faint blip, disappearing after just 2 seconds. Then another, slightly west. It looked random, but she noticed something. Each new blip appeared a few miles farther apart, forming a loose line, moving steadily toward their position. Her pulse quickened. She checked the transponder codes. Nothing. No friendly identification, no communication pings. That meant only two things. Either the radar was malfunctioning, or something out there was deliberately hiding. She scribbled notes in her logbook, marking each coordinate and time. The pattern was clear now. Someone or something was watching the fleet, testing the range of their radar. Samantha's first thought was to report it to her commanding officer. But she hesitated. The last time she mentioned unusual radar readings, everyone laughed it off. The Admiral himself had said, "You're seeing ghosts, Viper." The memory still stung. Still, she couldn't just ignore it. She double-checked the data, running it through the system twice. Everything matched. No software glitch. No atmospheric interference. The readings were real. Just then, The door slid open, and Lieutenant Mark Jensen, one of the radar technicians, walked in with a mug of coffee. He looked surprised to see her still there. "Viper, you're still up? It's almost 2 a.m. She nodded without looking away from the screen. "There's something off about the radar, Mark. Look here." He leaned over her shoulder. Could be a glitch. Happens sometimes when humidity's high." Samantha shook her head. "No, it's repeating at precise intervals, every 37 minutes. That's not weather. That's movement." Mark frowned. "So you think someone's out there?" "I think someone's testing how close they can get without being seen." He raised an eyebrow. "You really believe that?" "I don't believe. I calculate," she said quietly. Mark chuckled nervously and took a sip of coffee. "You should tell the Admiral." She sighed. "You know how that'll go. He'll just laugh again." But she couldn't sleep that night. Even when she tried to close her eyes, her mind replayed the pattern over and over like a ticking clock. The next morning, she went straight to the Admiral's office. He was reviewing flight reports when she entered. "Lieutenant Hayes," he said without looking up, "you're up early. What's on your mind?" "Sir, I believe there are unidentified objects approaching our area. The radar shows consistent signals moving toward us at specific intervals." The Admiral looked up and frowned slightly. "How strong are these signals?" "Very faint, sir. But they're organized, too organized to be random." He leaned back in his chair, clearly unimpressed. "And what do you suggest?" "We sound the alarm over a few blinking lights." "With respect, sir," she said carefully, "if those lights turn into aircraft or drones, we won't have time to react." The Admiral exchanged a look with Commander Brigg, who was standing nearby. "Lieutenant," Brigg said, "we've been in this region for months. The enemy hasn't dared come within 200 miles of us. Don't let nerves get to you." "I'm not nervous," Samantha replied firmly. "I'm observant." The Admiral sighed. "Fine. Run a diagnostic on the radar. Maybe you'll find a bug. But don't waste fuel chasing shadows." She saluted and left, but her mind was racing. She knew what she saw, and she wasn't going to dismiss it. Later that evening, she returned to the radar room with Mark. Together, they adjusted the frequency sensitivity and range. If the signals were real, they'd show up again. Minutes passed. The radar stayed quiet. Then suddenly, there they were. 3 faint dots moving slowly, then vanishing. Mark's expression changed from boredom to alarm. "Okay. That's not random." Samantha nodded. "Exactly. They're testing our detection limits. Whoever's out there knows how our radar works." Mark swallowed hard. "You think it's the enemy?" She stared at the screen. "I think it's a warning." She didn't wait this time. She printed the radar logs, highlighted the coordinates, and compiled a report. Her hands trembled slightly as she carried it to the Admiral's quarters. She didn't care if he laughed again. She needed him to see it. When she entered, he was in the middle of a call but waved her in. She handed him the papers. "Sir, I think you need to see this." He scanned through the pages with a frown. "You're saying these are enemy drones?" "Possibly," she said. "Or unmanned scouts. But their movement is deliberate. They're watching us." The Admiral sighed, rubbing his temples. "Hayes, you're young. You've got good eyes. But not everything that moves is a threat." Before she could respond, the radar alarm echoed faintly through the corridor outside. An alert for unidentified movement. The Admiral looked up sharply. "What was that?" An officer ran in. "Sir, radar picked up unidentified signals. Exactly on the coordinates Lieutenant Hayes reported." The Admiral's expression shifted from disbelief to concern. He looked at Samantha for a long moment, then finally said, "All right, Viper. Maybe you're onto something after all." Samantha didn't smile. She just nodded, her voice calm but firm. "Sir, they're not just scouting us. They're preparing for something bigger." As the ship's alarms blared louder and the crew rushed to stations, Samantha stood at the radar screen once more, eyes steady. She had been right all along, but she also knew this was only the beginning. The faint signals she'd spotted in the dark weren't ghosts. They were the first whispers of an enemy that was about to strike. The next morning, the mood on the USS Roosevelt was tense. The radar alarms from the night before had everyone talking. Some said it was nothing, just interference. Others whispered that the enemy was finally moving closer. But one thing was clear: Lieutenant Samantha Viper Hayes had everyone's attention now, including the Admiral's. She walked into the operations room with a file in her hand, her uniform neatly pressed but her eyes showing signs of another sleepless night. She had stayed awake for hours, studying radar logs, satellite data, and wind patterns. She had mapped out where the signals came from, where they vanished, and how often they appeared. It wasn't random. There was a rhythm, like a heartbeat. When she entered the briefing room, the Admiral, Commander Brigg, and several senior officers were already there. The air smelled of coffee and stress. The Admiral leaned back in his chair, trying to look relaxed, but his eyes were sharp. "Lieutenant Hayes," he said slowly, "you caused quite a stir last night. Everyone's been buzzing about your little radar show." Samantha stood straight. "Sir, I wasn't trying to cause a stir. I was trying to prevent one." That earned a few chuckles from the senior pilots sitting behind her. The Admiral smiled faintly. "Well, you've got the floor, Viper. Let's hear your theory. You think the enemy's planning something?" "Yes, sir," she said, opening her file and spreading several printed radar maps on the table. "These aren't random signals. They follow a clear formation path, small unmanned drones testing our radar perimeter. They're not attacking yet, but they're watching how we respond." The Admiral leaned forward. "And how do you know that?" Samantha pointed at the charts. "Because the distance between each signal increases every 37 minutes, and the angle of approach shifts by exactly 12 degrees. That's not noise. That's coordination." For a few seconds, no one spoke. Then Commander Brigg laughed softly. "So you're saying you can predict what the enemy will do next, Lieutenant? You're not a psychic, you're a pilot." The room chuckled again. But Samantha didn't back down. "No, sir. I'm not predicting the future. I'm following the pattern. And if it continues, they'll move into grid Echo 7 by 0400 hours tomorrow morning." The Admiral raised an eyebrow. "You're saying you can tell me exactly where the enemy will be?" "Yes, sir," she said without hesitation. The Admiral smiled, though it wasn't a kind smile. "All right, Viper. Let's make this interesting. You give me a location, a time, and a direction. If you're right, I'll make sure you get recognition. If you're wrong, you'll be cleaning radar screens for the next 6 months. Deal?" The officers laughed again, but Samantha's eyes stayed steady. "Deal, sir." She walked to the digital map, her boots clicking softly against the floor. Everyone watched as she zoomed in on a section of the ocean. "Here," she said, pointing at grid Echo 7. "At 0400 hours, the enemy will send a small strike formation through this corridor. They'll approach from the northeast using drone decoys to hide the real aircraft. They'll expect us to focus north, but the real threat will come from below radar range, low and fast." The Admiral tapped his fingers on the table. "And what do you expect me to do with this prediction?" "Send a small recon team to verify, sir. If I'm wrong, we lose an hour. If I'm right, we stop an ambush before it starts." The Admiral looked at her for a long moment, then sighed. "You've got guts, I'll give you that. Fine. Commander Brigg, dispatch 1 recon drone and 2 fighters to grid Echo 7. Let's see if our fortune teller here is right." "Yes, sir," Brigg replied, though his tone carried sarcasm. He didn't believe her either. As the meeting ended, Samantha gathered her papers quietly. One of the senior pilots smirked as he passed her. "You better be right, Viper, or you'll be on cleaning duty till retirement." She didn't respond. She simply looked at the radar map one more time before leaving the room. Her instincts screamed that she was right. The enemy wasn't attacking randomly, they were studying them, learning their movements. And soon they'd make their move. That evening, as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the ocean in shades of orange and purple, Samantha stood alone on the flight deck. The sound of waves and distant engines filled the air. She watched the recon planes take off, their engines roaring as they disappeared into the clouds. Her heart pounded. Everything depended on what they found or didn't find. Hours passed. Reports came in slowly, nothing unusual at first. The recon pilots reported calm skies and empty waters. Commander Briggs sent a message to the Admiral. No sign of enemy activity. The Admiral chuckled when he read it. Looks like your Viper sensors are just picking up shadows again. But Samantha didn't give up. She stayed by the radar, monitoring every line, every blip. Around 2:30, she noticed something. The faint signal was back. Just one this time, small but moving steadily along the exact path she had predicted. She leaned closer, her eyes wide. "Come on, show yourself," she whispered. At 3:15, another signal appeared. Then another. 3 small dots now, moving faster. She immediately called the control room. "This is Lieutenant Hayes. Enemy movement confirmed near grid Echo 7. I repeat, confirmed." The officer on duty hesitated. "Ma'am, we don't have visual confirmation yet." "You will," she said. "In 15 minutes. She raced to the Admiral's quarters, waking him up. "Sir, the enemy's here. Exactly where I said they'd be." The Admiral blinked, groggy and irritated. "Hayes, this better not be another false alarm." Before he could finish, the emergency alarm blared through the ship. The intercom crackled. Unidentified aircraft approaching on low altitude. Grid Echo 7 confirmed. The Admiral's expression changed instantly. He stood up fast. "Get me to the control room now." As the ship's crew rushed into action, Samantha followed, her heart racing but her face calm. The Admiral glanced at her once, this time without the smirk. "Lieutenant," he said almost grudgingly, "you might have just saved us a lot of trouble." Samantha didn't answer. She just looked out the window at the dark horizon where the enemy would soon appear, and said quietly, "Sir, this is just the beginning." The enemy hadn't even fired yet, but Viper already knew this battle was hers to read, and theirs to survive. The air on the USS Roosevelt was thick with tension that night. Everyone on the ship was awake, moving quickly through narrow hallways, checking equipment, and watching the radar screens. The report from Lieutenant Samantha Viper Hayes had changed everything. What started as a quiet shift had now turned into a full alert. But even after the Admiral approved a small recon mission, many still believed it was a false alarm. Samantha sat alone in the operations room, her eyes glued to the data streaming across her screen. The sound of radar pings filled the room, a steady, rhythmic pulse that matched the beating of her heart. She had made a bold claim that the enemy would attack at exactly 0400 hours through grid Echo 7. If she was wrong, her reputation and career would be finished. But if she was right, she might just save hundreds of lives. She had spent the last 6 hours reviewing every bit of information she could find. Satellite images, sonar readings, weather reports, everything pointed to one thing. The enemy was planning something big. They weren't attacking directly. They were testing, waiting, studying the fleet's every move. But the patterns didn't lie. They were gathering for a coordinated strike, and soon they would make their move. Her hand trembled slightly as she picked up her coffee mug. It was cold. She hadn't taken a sip in hours. Her mind was too focused. Across the room, Lieutenant Mark Jensen, the radar technician who had helped her the night before, looked up from his screen. "You really think they'll hit tonight?" he asked quietly. Samantha nodded. "Yes, the signals have been getting stronger and more frequent. They've stopped testing. They're preparing to engage." He frowned. "And the Admiral still doesn't believe you?" She gave a small, tired smile. "He believes enough to send a recon team. That's a start." At 0300 hours, she walked into the Admiral's command room carrying her latest report. The Admiral was standing by the window, looking out at the dark ocean. Commander Briggs was beside him, talking in a low voice. When Samantha entered, both men turned. "Lieutenant Hayes," the Admiral said, "you've made quite a name for yourself in the past 24 hours. Let's hope you're worth the noise." Samantha stood straight. "Sir, the data confirms a planned strike. Based on the signal frequency and direction, I believe the main assault will begin at 0400. Their drones will approach from the northeast to distract us, while their fighter jets will attack from low altitude to the south. The Admiral raised an eyebrow. You sound very sure of yourself. I'm sure of the math, sir, she replied calmly. Commander Brigg crossed his arms. You expect us to believe you've figured out the enemy's entire plan just from radar patterns? Samantha looked at him. I didn't just read the radar. I compared the patterns to their last known movements in the Philippine Sea. They're repeating the same tactics, only this time they're using decoy signals to hide their real approach. The Admiral walked closer to her. And what's your recommendation, Lieutenant? She took a deep breath. Deploy a recon drone and a small defense formation to grid Echo 7. Have our main fleet hold fire until visual confirmation. If I'm wrong, we'll lose time. But if I'm right, we'll stop an ambush before it begins. The Admiral stared at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right, Viper. You've got your recon team. But if they come back empty-handed, I'll take full responsibility, sir, she said firmly. The Admiral gave a short laugh. You've got guts. I'll give you that. At 0330, the recon drone launched into the dark sky, its lights flashing faintly as it disappeared into the horizon. 2 fighter jets followed at a safe distance, their engines roaring like thunder. On board, the pilots were half joking, half curious. So this is the rookie's big prediction, huh? One said over the comms. Let's see if she's got magic powers. Samantha listened to the chatter quietly from her seat in the operations room. She didn't respond. Her eyes were fixed on the radar feed. The drone's camera showed nothing but dark water and mist. The minutes ticked by painfully slow. 3:40. 3:45. Still nothing. Mark whispered. Maybe it was just interference after all. Samantha didn't answer. She was staring at a faint movement on her screen. It was small, barely visible, but it was there. A blip, then 2, then 3. Her heart jumped. There, she said sharply. Northeast quadrant. Low altitude. The comms officer turned to the Admiral. Sir, radar confirms unidentified objects approaching. The Admiral's eyes narrowed. How many? For so far wait now 8. They're moving fast. The Admiral turned to Samantha. That's your prediction, isn't it? Yes, sir, she said. They're testing our defenses. The drones are decoys. The real strike will come from the south within minutes. The Admiral looked at her, skeptical but uneasy. Prove it. Samantha quickly overlaid radar data from 2 different systems, showing how the false signals were masking another group moving from below radar range. She pointed at the screen. See these shadows here? That's the real attack group. Commander Brigg's eyes widened. She's right. Those aren't echoes, they're aircraft. At 3:57 hours, the first warning alarms blared across the ship. The radar screens lit up with enemy signatures. Dozens of them. The bridge fell silent for half a second before the Admiral barked orders. Sound battle stations. All hands to defense positions. Within seconds, the ship erupted into organized chaos. Pilots scrambled to their jets, deck crews ran to their stations, and anti-air batteries powered up. Outside, the night sky filled with flashing lights as enemy aircraft approached fast. From the command center, Samantha watched as the fleet moved exactly as she had predicted. Her recon data gave them a full 3-minute advantage, a lifetime in aerial combat. The carrier's interceptors launched into the sky, meeting the enemy before they reached missile range. The Admiral stood behind her, watching the screens in awe. For the first time, he didn't have a smirk. You called it Viper, he said quietly. Every damn detail. Samantha didn't smile. She just kept her eyes on the radar, tracking every movement with calm precision. It's not over yet, sir, she replied. The battle raged on outside, explosions flashing on the horizon. But the fleet was ready this time, because one pilot had seen the storm coming before anyone else did. When the final enemy signal disappeared from the radar, the room erupted in cheers. The attack was over. The fleet was safe. And Samantha's prediction had saved them all. As the Admiral looked at her, his voice softened. Remind me never to laugh at your call sign again. Samantha allowed herself a small smile. I told you, sir. The patterns never lie. The battle had ended, but the sound of it still echoed in everyone's minds. The night sky above the ocean was finally quiet again, except for the distant hum of returning aircraft. The crew of the USS Roosevelt was exhausted, but alive. Smoke drifted across the deck, and the sea reflected flashes of light from the burning remains of enemy drones floating on the waves. Everyone knew what had just happened. Lieutenant Samantha Viper Hayes had been right. Her prediction had saved them from a deadly ambush. But for Samantha, there was no time to celebrate. She stood on the deck, helmet still in her hands, eyes scanning the dark horizon. Her body was tense, her mind racing through the battle again and again. She had seen the enemy's moves before they made them, but something still didn't sit right. It was too easy. The attack had been fierce but not as destructive as it could have been. Felt like a test. Commander Brigg walked up behind her, his uniform dusty, his face tired but respectful. You did it, Lieutenant, he said. The Admiral's already talking about you in the command room. You might have just earned yourself a promotion. Samantha gave a faint smile. We got lucky, sir. I don't think they sent their main force. This was just a probe to study our defenses. Brigg frowned. You think they'll come again? She nodded slowly. Yes, sir. And next time, they'll come with everything they've got. Inside the command room, the atmosphere was completely different. The Admiral, who had once mocked her, was now serious and focused. He was standing at the table surrounded by maps and radar reports, replaying the data from the last few hours. When Samantha entered, everyone turned toward her. The Admiral gestured for her to step forward. Well, Viper, he said, his tone no longer sarcastic. It looks like your instincts just saved the fleet. It wasn't instincts, sir, she said quietly. It was pattern recognition and data analysis. He smiled faintly. Call it whatever you want. It worked. She nodded, but her expression remained thoughtful. Sir, permission to analyze the full radar history from the past 12 hours. I think there's more to this than what we saw. Commander Brigg gave her a confused look. You still don't trust that it's over? Samantha looked at him. No, sir. The way they moved, the timing, it felt like they wanted us to see them. They could have used stealth formations and hit us before we even noticed. But they didn't. The Admiral leaned forward, his hands resting on the table. You think it was bait? Yes, sir, she said firmly. They wanted us to react, to reveal how we defend. Now they know our radar range, our scramble time, even our drone deployment speed. The next time they come, they'll use that against us. The room went silent. For a few seconds, only the faint hum of equipment filled the space. Then the Admiral straightened up. All right, Lieutenant. Pull the data. I want your full analysis by 0600. Samantha saluted and walked out quickly, determination in her step. She didn't feel like a hero. She felt like someone standing in the middle of a puzzle that wasn't finished yet. Down in the operations room, she sat beside Mark Jensen again. He was grinning, still high on adrenaline. You're a legend now, he said. You saved us all, Viper. She didn't smile back. Mark, I need you to help me cross-check the radar pings from earlier with satellite data. Focus on the gaps, especially around 0200 hours. He blinked. You're still working? You haven't even eaten. I'll eat when I know what we missed, she replied, her voice calm but firm. Mark sighed and nodded. All right, Viper. Let's dig in. For the next 2 hours, they worked in near silence. Lines of data scrolled across their screens. Samantha's eyes darted between numbers and radar echoes, comparing timestamps, frequencies, and signal strength. Then she froze. Mark, look at this, she said, zooming in on a faint line of readings. Do you see that distortion? He leaned closer. Yeah. That's not radar interference. That's a cloaked signal. Her pulse quickened. Exactly. While we were focused on the decoy attack, another formation slipped past us, completely silent. They didn't attack, but they got close enough to scan us. Mark's face turned pale. You mean they were watching the whole time? She nodded slowly. Yes, and now they know everything about our defense systems. Just then, the Admiral's voice came over the intercom. Lieutenant Hayes, report to the command room immediately. When she entered, he was already looking at the same data on the main screen. I see you found it, he said. Yes, sir, she replied. We were never the real target. The attack was just a distraction. Their goal was reconnaissance. They wanted to map our response capabilities. The Admiral exhaled heavily, rubbing his temples. So they know how we fight now. Yes, sir. Which means next time, they'll strike where we're weakest. For a long moment no one spoke. The weight of her words sank in. Finally, the Admiral looked up. Then we'll need a new strategy, one they won't expect. He gave her a sharp look. And I want you on that planning team, Viper. Samantha blinked, surprised. Me, sir? You predicted this once. Maybe you can do it again, he said. We'll call it Operation Phantom Shield. She nodded, her voice steady. Understood, sir. As she left the room, the corridor outside was quiet again. The adrenaline had faded, replaced by cold awareness. She walked to the deck and looked out at the endless dark water. The horizon was calm now, but she knew it wouldn't last. Somewhere out there, the enemy was watching, waiting, learning. Mark joined her, holding 2 cups of coffee. You think they'll come back soon? Samantha took a sip, her eyes still on the sea. They're already planning it, she said softly. But next time we'll be ready. The first light of dawn began to rise over the ocean, painting the waves gold and silver. The night had been long, the danger real. But Samantha Hayes, call sign Viper, had proven something more powerful than anyone expected. She wasn't just a rookie with good instincts. She was a strategist. A mind the Navy couldn't afford to underestimate ever again. For the first time, the Admiral didn't see her as a joke. He saw her as a weapon, the kind that didn't fire bullets but predicted where they'd be needed before the trigger was even pulled. The sun had just started to rise above the endless blue sea when the mood aboard the USS Roosevelt began to change. The night before, the crew had survived an ambush that could have destroyed them all. Now, with the daylight, came a strange mix of relief and disbelief. Some sailors smiled proudly, others just stared out at the horizon, still trying to process how close they had come to disaster. And at the center of it all stood Lieutenant Samantha Viper Hayes, the woman whose prediction had saved the fleet. But while the others celebrated, Samantha's mind was somewhere else. She had hardly slept. Her instincts told her that the battle they fought last night wasn't the real one. It had only been a warning, a rehearsal for something much bigger. She could feel it deep down, a quiet tension that refused to go away. In the control room, the Admiral and Commander Brigg were studying the aftermath reports. The Admiral had stopped smiling since dawn. Our radar patterns are compromised, he said, pointing at the screen. They've studied our response time and defense strategy. If Viper's theory is correct, the next attack won't be a test. It'll be a strike meant to sink us. Commander Brigg looked uneasy. We've already sent the data to HQ, but it'll take days for reinforcements to reach us. The Admiral leaned back in his chair. Then we'll have to rely on what we've got, and on Viper. Just then, Samantha entered the room. She saluted sharply. Sir, I've been reviewing our signal archives. I found something unusual. The Admiral gestured for her to continue. There's a repeating signal embedded in the interference from last night, she explained. It's short, rhythmic, almost like a code. It appears every 4 hours exactly. I think the enemy is using it to coordinate movements between their ships. Commander Brigg frowned. You're saying they're still out there? Yes, sir, Samantha replied. They're nearby, just outside our radar range. The Admiral stood up slowly. If that's true, we're not out of danger yet. How sure are you, Lieutenant? Samantha looked him straight in the eye. 95%, sir. There was a silence in the room. Then the Admiral nodded. Then we prepare for round 2. Word spread quickly through the ship. The crew who had been celebrating suddenly grew quiet again. Mechanics double-checked the aircraft, gunners loaded the cannons, and radar operators watched their screens with tense focus. The Roosevelt was ready for another fight. Samantha went to the flight deck where her jet, a sleek F-18 Hornet, waited. She hadn't flown since the attack, but now she felt a pull toward the cockpit. She climbed up, checking the systems carefully. Mark Jensen, her radar technician friend, appeared beside the jet holding a data pad. "You're really going up again, huh?" Samantha smiled faintly. "If they're out there, I'll find them." He hesitated. "You know the Admiral's putting a lot of faith in you." She looked at the horizon. "Then I can't let him down." At 0900 hours, she launched into the sky. The engines roared to life, and the deck crew watched as her jet disappeared into the glowing morning clouds. Her call sign, Viper, echoed through the comms channel. "Command, this is Viper. Beginning scan of sectors Delta through Echo." "Copy that, Viper," came the Admiral's voice. "Stay sharp." The world below looked peaceful, too peaceful. The ocean stretched endlessly, shining under the sun, but Samantha knew better. She adjusted her radar and switched to a deeper frequency. Minutes passed with nothing unusual, until a faint reading appeared on her screen. Then another. "Command, I've got movement at the edge of Sector Echo 9, she reported. "Can you confirm?" the Admiral asked. Samantha zoomed in and adjusted the filters. What she saw made her heart race. Multiple objects, small, low-flying, and moving fast beneath the radar line. "Sir, I count 12 enemy aircraft heading our way. They're in formation and closing distance." "Understood," the Admiral said. "Return to base immediately." But Samantha didn't turn back right away. She kept tracking the formation, feeding live coordinates to the fleet. "They're splitting up," she said quickly. "For going east, 8 heading straight for the carrier." Suddenly, her radar beeped. A missile lock warning. "Command, I've been painted," she shouted, pulling the jet into a sharp climb. A missile streaked past her left wing, exploding in the distance. The shockwave rocked her jet, but she steadied it instantly. "Viper, get out of there!" The Admiral's voice boomed through the radio. "Negative, sir. I can keep them busy long enough for the fleet to reposition." "Lieutenant, that's an order." But Samantha was already diving back toward the ocean, pushing her jet to its limits. The enemy fighters followed her, their missiles cutting through the air. She twisted and turned through the clouds, countering every move with expert precision. She wasn't just flying. She was predicting. She could almost feel their pilots' next actions before they happened. When one enemy jet climbed, she knew the second would dive. When they tried to box her in, she rolled out seconds before they could strike. Her instincts, the same instincts that had made the Admiral laugh days ago, were now keeping her alive. Meanwhile, back on the Roosevelt, the Admiral watched the radar screens light up. "Deploy interceptors. Cover Viper's return," he ordered. The ship's jets launched one after another, streaking into the sky. The battle began again, but this time, they weren't caught off guard. Thanks to Viper's quick thinking, the fleet already knew the enemy's strategy. Samantha's voice came over the comms again. "Command, I've got visual confirmation of their lead aircraft. If we take him out, the rest will scatter." "Copy that," the Admiral said. "You've got the green light." She locked onto the target, her finger steady on the trigger. The tone in her headset changed to a sharp, high-beep missile lock confirmed. "Fox 2, she called, firing. The missile streaked forward, hit its target, and exploded into a massive fireball. The other enemy fighters broke formation instantly, retreating in confusion. The sky cleared within minutes. Cheers erupted through the Roosevelt's control room. The Admiral let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. "That's our Viper," he said quietly. As Samantha landed her jet on the deck, the crew ran to greet her. She climbed down slowly, her face covered in sweat but her eyes steady. Mark ran up to her, grinning from ear to ear. "You did it again. You saved us twice in one day." She smiled faintly. "Let's just say the enemy doesn't learn easily." The Admiral approached her with a rare expression of pride. "Lieutenant Hayes," he said, "you disobeyed a direct order. But you also just stopped a second attack before it began. Samantha looked at him, waiting for his next words. He smiled. Remind me to never question your call sign again, Viper. For the first time since she joined the Navy, Samantha felt fully seen. Not as a rookie, not as a joke, but as the pilot who could see danger before it even appeared. And though the sea stretched endlessly before her, she knew the fight wasn't over. Somewhere beyond that horizon, the enemy was regrouping, and when they returned, Viper would be ready once again. The sky was calm again, painted in shades of gold and pink as the sun began to set over the endless ocean. The USS Roosevelt floated steadily on the waves, its crew moving slowly, tired but proud. The air smelled of salt, jet fuel, and relief. Everyone knew what had just happened. The enemy had been defeated again, and the reason they were still alive was because of one woman, Lieutenant Samantha Viper Hayes. Samantha stood alone on the deck, her helmet under her arm, looking out at the horizon. The battle was over for now, but her heart was still racing. The ocean was quiet, but she could feel that silence wasn't peace. It was only a pause. Somewhere out there, beyond the horizon, the enemy was regrouping. She knew this wasn't the end. As she watched the sun sink lower, Admiral Grant walked toward her. The same man who had once laughed at her call sign now stopped beside her, his expression thoughtful and serious. You've had quite a week, Lieutenant, he said with a faint smile. Samantha turned to him. Just doing my job, sir. He chuckled softly. You didn't just do your job, Viper. You saved the entire fleet. Twice. She didn't answer immediately. Her gaze returned to the water. It wasn't just me, sir. Everyone followed orders perfectly. That's what made the difference. The Admiral shook his head. You're too humble. What you did out there, no one else could have done it. You saw things no radar or system could pick up. You predicted them. Samantha smiled slightly. Sometimes it's not about seeing with your eyes, sir. It's about listening to the rhythm, the way the enemy moves, the way the sea reacts. It's all a pattern. He looked at her curiously. Is that how you do it? You read patterns like a book? She nodded. Yes, sir. My father used to tell me that war isn't chaos. It's a rhythm of mistakes. The side that reads that rhythm wins. The Admiral stared at her for a long moment, then laughed softly. Remind me to promote your father too. They both smiled, and for the first time, there was no tension between them. Only mutual respect. The same officer who had once mocked her call sign now trusted her with the fate of his fleet. Later that evening, the ship's deck lights flickered on, casting a warm glow across the steel surface. The crew gathered in small groups, talking, laughing, sharing stories from the battle. Even the toughest veterans couldn't stop mentioning Viper's name. Some called her a genius. Others said she had supernatural instincts. But for Samantha, those compliments didn't matter. What mattered was that everyone had made it home alive. Mark Jensen, the radar technician and one of her closest allies, walked up carrying 2 mugs of coffee. You still thinking about the next fight? He asked, handing her one. Samantha took it, her eyes still on the darkening horizon. You know me too well, he chuckled. You really think they'll come back? They will, she said quietly. They didn't lose as much as they wanted us to think. They learned from us. They'll adjust. And when they come again, they'll be smarter. Mark looked uneasy. So what do we do? She took a slow sip of coffee and smiled faintly. We get smarter too. As the night deepened, the Admiral called a meeting in the command room. Everyone gathered around the central table, where digital maps of the sea glowed under dim lights. We're renaming our defensive plan, he announced. From this point on, we're operating under Operation Viper Shield. A murmur of approval rippled through the room. Samantha looked surprised. Sir, after me? The Admiral nodded. You earned it. The strategy you created, predicting enemy behavior, identifying false signals, it's now standard protocol for the fleet. Commander Brigg, once her harshest critic, even smiled. Guess we should start calling you Commander instead of Lieutenant. Huh? Samantha blushed slightly but kept her composure. Thank you, sir. But I'm not looking for promotion. I just want us ready for what's next." The Admiral leaned on the table. "And we will be. Because now we've got a Viper watching the skies." That night, after the meeting, Samantha returned to her quarters. The ship hummed quietly, steady and strong beneath her feet. She sat at her desk, turned on her small reading lamp, and opened her flight log. Her hand moved carefully across the page as she wrote. "They laughed at my call sign once. They thought Viper was a joke. Too sharp, too ambitious for a rookie. But today that name means something. It means precision, instinct, and survival. And if the enemy comes again, they'll learn what it really means to face a Viper in the sky." She paused for a moment, then closed the book and leaned back. The hum of the engines and the gentle rocking of the ship were comforting. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to breathe. A knock came at the door. It was Mark again. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "Just finishing my report," she said with a smile. He leaned against the doorway. "You know, the Admiral wasn't the only one who doubted you. I did too. Thought you were overconfident. But after what I saw, you've earned my respect. All of it." Samantha smiled softly. "Respect doesn't matter, Mark. Results do." He nodded. "Still, you've changed how we all see things. You made us believe in something bigger than orders, instinct." When he left, Samantha looked out the small window beside her bed. The stars were scattered across the sky, bright and endless. The ocean below shimmered like liquid silver. For the first time, she felt peace. Not because the war was over, but because she finally belonged. The next morning, she stood on the flight deck again as a new group of young pilots prepared for takeoff. One of them, a nervous rookie, saluted her. "Ma'am, they told us about you. Is it true you predicted the enemy before they even showed up?" Samantha smiled kindly. "Let's just say I paid attention to the signs." The young pilot nodded, inspired. "I hope I can be like you someday." "You will," she said. "Just trust your instincts. And never ignore the patterns. They'll always tell you the truth." As the jet engines roared and the young pilots soared into the sky, Samantha felt a quiet pride. Her story had started as a joke, a rookie with a funny call sign, but it ended with her name becoming a legend. And somewhere far beyond the calm sea, where the sky met the horizon, the world now knew one thing for certain. When the Admiral laughed at Viper, he had no idea he was laughing at the future.